on the East Coast. Good afternoon on, I'm sorry, the West Coast. Good afternoon on the East Coast, and probably good evening in Europe and the rest of the world. Today, we're going to have a really fun discussion, something that's dear to my heart, the analog sound, and in particular, the tape. But let me bring our first guest, which actually is going to probably become one of the regulars. But let me give you a hint.
Hi guys.
Hey, Seymour.
Good morning to you. How you doing?
We got you again, and I hope you're going to be regular. I think it's fun.
Yeah, we're gonna do some fun stuff.
A lot of people are telling me that they really enjoy this conversation. So I really hope that you enjoy it too. And I would love you to be a regular. You know,
Yeah, I think it'd be
let
great.
me. Yeah, let's let's talk about the next special guest we have. But it's kind of funny. In the last few years, vinyls became kind of a normal again. Who believe, right? If we talk about 10 years ago about vinyls, everybody said we're crazy, but now it's almost like it's a regular thing. But this, listen to the sound. This is a format that was gone for many years, and nobody believed that it will ever come back. In fact, also, if anybody knows about reel to reel, you know, um, that's another format that. But guess what? I'm losing stuff over here. It's coming back, and today we have a special guest, and his name is Steve Stepp. And Steve, he is the owner of National Audio Company, which based in St. Louis, Missouri, right, Steve?
Springfield, pretty close, about
Springfield.
three
So,
hours away, but pretty close.
but you are, can we say, the only U.S. cassette tape manufacturer that left?
Sage, good morning to you. We are the only manufacturer of cassette tape in the U.S. There is a manufacturer in York, Pennsylvania, named ATR Magnetics, and they make reel-to-reel tape for studio applications still. But we are the only people manufacturing cassette tape itself, and we are, as far as I know, are the world's largest duplicator and provider of recorded music cassettes.
Wow,
That's
that's
very cool. Yeah,
you got to be proud
amazing.
in that. So, um, in a minute, I will actually give it to Seymour because I'm sure he got tons of questions. But can you give us just a tiny little bit of history about you? You and I did a podcast about a year ago,
Yes,
and here we go, digital, right?
there we
And
go.
when I was ready to publish it, the files were gone. I couldn't find it. I mean, nothing. It's gone, which,
That's right.
we'll talk about what's the benefit of tapes, right? But can you tell us a little bit
Right.
history?
All right. What do you want to start with? You want to start with getting into tape manufacturing, or do you want to start with the beginning of National Audio Company? What would you like to hear?
Um, let's hear about how did you get into tape, and if you also can give us the history of tape, because I remember when we
Mhm.
talked about a year ago, you told me a story how the tape even started,
Tape began, yes.
like in Germany or something. And I was when you told
Right.
me what it was made of, I was like, what?
I'll
So
try to I'll try to make it as straightforward and short as I can for you. But during World War II, the Allies wondered why they were hearing or how they were hearing speeches by Hitler in, for instance, Berlin, Frankfurt, Cologne, other cities around Germany. They were hearing radio broadcasts, but the speeches weren't the same speeches, and they'd be at the same time. And they wondered, how is he doing this? Is it wire recording? Is it some kind of discs or something like that? And then toward the end of the war, when the Russians were entering Berlin from the east and the Allies were entering the rest of the Allies from the west, there was a gentleman who was a Russian general named A.M. Pontiatov. And he had the same question: how was this going on? So he made up his mind when he got to Berlin, he would seize one of the radio stations that he'd heard broadcasting these speeches. He got there and he found a very crude version of what we would call a reel to reel tape recorder, with reel to reel tape, quarter-inch wide reel to reel tape. And they had invented magnetic tape. They didn't make it like we make it now. They
Right.
had made it on paper film or on a paper strata, and they were using red iron oxide. It was very
Mm.
coarse and very crude by today's standards, and they had somehow affixed it onto the paper base film, and that was the beginning of magnetic tapes. First anybody had seen it.
On
So
paper.
on paper. So
Hmm.
Pontiac, being the good comrade that he was, and not wanting anything to do with capitalism,
Wow.
seized the tape recorder and several reels of the tape and defected to the West. And
Hmm.
he told people, I want to go to the United States and I want to meet Bing Crosby.
Huh.
And so he came over here with his tape recorder and with his tape that he'd seized, showed Bing Crosby what he had, and he talked about that with him, and he thought this could be used, in performances and music and so on. And Crosby knew a man named Orr. His last name was Orr, and I believe it was John Orr. It may have been Stan, who lived in Opelika, Alabama. And Orr was experimenting with various recording techniques at the time. So the two of them went there and met Mr. Orr. And what came out of that was a beginning of a partnership to manufacture a durable, more consumer friendly, and more professional friendly magnetic tape. And they quickly decided that paper film wasn't the best way to go. In wet weather, it would swell, and dry weather, it would shrink, and anyway, it would tear easily, and it wasn't very durable. And they got into manufacturing with acetates. The first reel to reel tapes were acetate film, and some of those are still around. We have people bring us original recordings and masters even today recorded in the 1950s on acetate. Acetate was great. It wasn't as durable as polyester because it would dry out with time, and then if you weren't very careful handling it, it would break, and it would break in a straight line right across the tape, just like you'd cut it with a razor blade. But the recording surface stayed good. And so they moved from acetates into polyesters and began investigating how to go into the tape business. And
Right.
the first
Cool.
tape they made, they branded as Irish. And then they had another idea when they decided to go into the professional market. They needed another name. And the name they came up with was Ampex,
Huh.
very near and dear to the hearts of most people who've been around as long as we have in the recording industry. Ampex stood for AM Pontiatov Excellence, and that was
Okay.
the name of their company they formed. And then, as they say, the rest is history.
That was
Uh,
here in the U.S.
that was in Opelika, Alabama,
Okay.
and so that was in the mid to late 1940s when all that began. And of course, reel to reel tape became very popular in the studios, and Seymour can tell you all about experiences he's had with that. National Audio was founded in 1968 by my father and me. And our purpose when we went in business, I was still in college at the time, and he had sold interest in a company that he had. And our purpose was to sell Ampex reel to reel tape to recording studios and radio stations. And we began selling the tape, and we became one of their largest, if not their largest distributor in North America. And a lot of trips back and forth to Opelika to see the plant. It was a magnificent place to see. At one
Right.
time, they had about 2,400 employees and over 100,000 square feet of clean rooms in that plant.
Mm.
And so I would be back
Wow.
and forth as a young man down there, and we saw how tape was made, and we stayed with them until 2007 when they finally closed the plant. By that time, they made cassette tape, by the way, beginning in the late 60s. They were a very, very high quality manufacturer of audio cassette tape itself for people who recorded and loaded cassettes. And we'd been selling that. And then they came to us first of all with a sales rep uh, calling on us, and he brought us the first Ampex audio cassette that I'd ever seen. And he showed it me and he said, "What do you think of that?" And now, Sage and Seymour, I'm going to show my foresight here. I looked at it and I said, "Well, it looks like if a little girl had a doll, you could maybe use that thing to make it have a voice, but I can't see any other application for it." And he grinned and he said, "It's going to be a little bigger than that." And it was. Sure enough, we began selling their audio cassettes. And after a while, we had more demand than they could supply. And we had there at that time, in the early days of the cassette industry, people would buy pancakes or hubs or reels, as we might call them today,
Right.
of cassette tape. And there were little home loaders, machines you could load it into plastic cassette cartridges, and people would buy those and make them. And we began buying those from mom and pops all over the country, trying to supply all of the book publishers and ministries and music publishers who were out in the field and wanting to get into tape. Quickly realized we couldn't buy enough cassettes to supply the demand out there. And so in 1980, we bought our first automated cassette loader and we began manufacturing cassettes on our own plant. And we thought that's going to be all we'll ever need. The next year we bought 2 more. Next year we bought 4 more. We quickly had 16 cassette loaders running, and we still couldn't supply all the demand. And we had to move out of the building that we had into another building. 2 or 3 moves later, we bought the old 1882 factory that we are in now. It's 135,000 square feet.
Wow.
And so now we manufacture about 100,000 cassettes a day. And to all those
100,000 a day?
Yes, to all those who think the audio cassette is dead, you need to come to National Audio and see this. As I told Seymour and Sage earlier, when you walk through the front door of National Audio, you step back 50 years in technology. We use modern technology, but we have managed to restore a lot of equipment from the 1960s and early 70s, where the tapes were made back in those days. So I don't know how long you want this to go on, but I'll tell you quickly how we got into making tape. In 2016, Ampex was gone. They closed the plant in 2007. They were gone. BASF had quit making tape. 3M had quit making tape. All the people we used to buy tape from were out of the business. And we were still growing in the audio cassette field. We had finally ended up dealing with people in South Korea. There was a company called SKM, or it had been originally Sunkyong. And there's another company called Seihan. Seihan was famous for VHS tape. And Seihan was still making cassette tape. And in December of 2016, they told us, we're going to close the tape line down at the end of this month, and we won't be making any more tape.
Mm.
And my dad and I were in business together. And the next thing we had to realize was, what are we going to do? Are we going to go out of business? Because that's mainly what we do. Ampex was gone. Reel-to-reel tape was gone at that time. And what are we going to do? We either have to get out of business or we have to find a way to make tape. And so the search began, and we actually turned up over a course of a couple of years. We turned up 2 of the tape lines that had been used in the plant down there, in the Ampex plant, to coat tape. We had one of the main coating lines, and we had one of what they called the lab line. And so they were built in the 1960s, and one of them had gone out to Nevada to be used to make credit card strips and parking tickets, the magnetic strips that go on those.
Yeah.
One of the other one had gone back to the plant in Birmingham where it had originally been built, and they were using it as a showroom model on the floor to show people how they could build coating lines. So we ended up buying those and hauling them here, and those are stories on their own. Hauling them here in the open on Conestoga type trucks and blizzards and all sorts of things. But it took us 4 years. We bought the last 300,000 reels of tape that Seihan had, and we knew we had about 3 years to be in the tape business. And we were lucky enough to find the last of the old hands from the American tape manufacturers and to get either their advice by telephone or in writing, and we got some of them to come here and to actually help us put this thing back together, because we were all emotionally bought into the business. Most of them, that had been their life's work, and they were very happy to see tape come back. And so we were able to get them to come out of retirement for maybe a week or 2 at a time and come up here and help us. And we restored our main coating line is 62 feet long
Wow.
and weighs 20 tons. And it manufactures 40 reels of cassette tape at a time at a speed of 200 feet a minute. So it's
Man,
quite
that's
an
very
operation.
Wow.
We run enough tape every day to string to the moon and back. That's in the
Wow.
actual footage. That's how much tape we run every day. So when people tell you, "Oh, the cassette's dead and gone," not
No,
quite.
they're not.
Not
Well, you
quite.
can
So
look behind me and you know they're not gone.
that's
I'm
true.
gonna have Seymour ask you a few questions, but we have some people from England. Actually, Paul Rose is watching us, so they're saying hello. But
Absolutely. Hello, Paul.
Seymour, I mean, I know I have tons of questions, but I want Seymour to go ahead and
All right.
throw some of his
Now,
questions.
yeah, Steve, boy, this is
Yes, sir.
to me. I just love all this, the history, and these young players and kids and musicians. They need to realize during the 60s and 70s and 80s, we had so many tapes out there, the reel to reel,
Yes.
the
Oh,
cassette
yeah.
tapes. I mean, I have thousands of cassette tapes. I mean,
Mhm.
Sage knows at my studio, and it's it's amazing how you take for granted that this audio is being put on these little cassette tapes. How's it being done, or how do they do it? And the machinery's got to be incredible. I mean, you have to watch and listen, and you got the crew there to really take control of how this audio is being put onto cassettes, which I think is so cool. I mean, it's fantastic. But the thing that cracks me up is, I would take it for granted, having a cassette tape. I mean, it's like, whoa, man. And then you can I love rewinding it, and I used to have him in my car. I had an old Camaro, man. It was
Uh-huh.
a great car, and I would keep playing my. Oh God, I was probably playing. My favorite was Albert Collins, blues player, and he's from back east in Texas too. And so the music that's being put onto it, it's amazing. Now, are there any tricks to a cassette that if it starts losing its magnetic field, what you can do to restore it or anything? Do you know?
You really shouldn't lose it. Sage,
Yeah.
in our tests, when we're making our tape, we actually try to beat the tape to death and see how many passes it can make before you can't hear the recording anymore. We haven't been able to do that. The tapes that we are making right now, we have run as many as 40,000 passes. A
Wow.
cassette runs at 1 7/8 inches per second. 1 7/8 inches of tape passes the record head each second that the tape is playing. And so we have run these continually in test decks at 216 inches per second, so very high speed. And we've run them continually for up to 40,000 passes. What you will see is a polishing of the oxide. You actually scrape some of it off, given that many passes. You'll see a polishing of oxide and some streaks develop in it and so on. And when you pop it back into a regular deck at 1 7/8, you still hear the recording. It's still clear. It's going to be at a lower level because part of the oxide is simply gone. But unless it encounters a magnetic field that partially erases it,
Right.
magnetic tape should not lose its recording. And we've even had, as I said, some of the old acetate tapes in the 50s brought in. And those tapes are as good magnetically as they were the day they were made. Physically, not so much. The
Right.
acetate stage well, but shouldn't lose. There really aren't any tricks. Keep your tapes between 40 degrees and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep them dry in dry conditions. The two most damaging things to recording tape are heat and humidity. And so you don't
Oh
want to
yeah.
keep them in a musty basement where it's cool and damp. That's the worst place. But even old tapes, always use them at room temperature. If you use a tape at a temperature where you're comfortable, you're not going to damage the tape playing or recording it there. So no tricks really. Tape is pretty straightforward. It's pretty durable. It is next to the vinyl record. It is the oldest uh, format in the music industry, and
Right.
it's still around. And the little flag I'd like to wave and the horn I'd like to toot is that last year both vinyl records and audio cassettes outsold music CDs in the commercial market.
This is
I
unreal.
needed that for all
Yeah,
these
that's
years.
great, man. Jeez.
This is unreal. I mean, if 30 years ago, if somebody would have told me, hey, in 2019, cassette will outsell CDs, I'll tell them, you guys are just go back to Mars or something, because you, you're just talking BS. But I mean, it's unreal. But I want to ask you, I want to elaborate on what Seymour was asking you. So we know, and you mentioned it, that if you run the tape for a long time, you're not going to lose anything, but some of the residue
Yeah,
will
you're going to really
maybe.
rub part of the oxide off. Right.
Right. So if you re-record on
Yes.
top of that old tape,
Okay.
re-record on it,
Yes.
are you going to gain back the, let's say, maybe high frequencies that you lost, or no?
You're not going to be losing frequencies. You're going to be losing output. You
Just
could
output?
re-record. You're going to re-record the old tape. It may sound pretty good.
Huh.
I wouldn't say you're necessarily going to lose any kind of frequencies, but you will lose output. You physically don't have as much oxide on there as you had. Now, it doesn't take a very thick coating of oxide to make a good recording tape.
Right.
But if you've rubbed off half of what you had, um, as one of our techs here likes to call it, part of the little iron men are gone. The little particles that are actually the recording surface, part of them are gone. They're just rubbed
Yeah.
off. So you may still get pretty good frequency response. It wouldn't be like it was when it was brand new, but it's not going to be just muddy and muffly. But it
Okay.
probably will be half or less of the output you originally had on that tape.
So all you got to do is just go to your stereo and just raise the volume.
Yeah, probably so.
Huh?
I
Probably
think
so.
it's important too. Your tape record head, your playback head, you need to keep that clean because it'll
Absolutely.
build up oxidized.
Right.
It'll particles on it, and
Yes.
then it'll scrape maybe off some of
Absolutely.
the newer cassette tape. You
That's right.
would lose it. So you got to keep your tape heads clean. I'm pretty
Yes, you
sure
do.
most of the
And
time.
Seymour, that's a funny thing. When nowadays, when we have people talk to us about this, or somebody will call with a problem, and we'll be trying to help them, and they'll say, we'll say, well, how often do you clean the heads and the guides on your deck? And quite often, the next thing they say is, clean them? What do you mean?
Yeah,
And
I
they've
bet. I
never
see.
heard of the
Yeah,
concept. They're used to digital media where you don't have
Yeah.
any
Right.
rubbing on the CD, and
right.
it's an alien idea to them that you have to actually clean parts of the machine to make it operate the tape. So you're exactly right.
Yeah,
Well,
you
it's
clean the
it's
head, the high ends come back. It seems.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is pretty
What
amazing.
what can you tell us about the difference between a normal bias and a chrome, and of course the
Metal.
middle that's considered to be probably the best? So
I can tell you more than you want to hear probably in a short session here.
go ahead, man.
The original tapes that were made were all ferric. They were iron oxide, and that is still the primary tape that's used worldwide in audio tape. Uh, Iron oxide is basically that. You dig up iron ore out of the earth. You get some that is pretty consistent. It's refined, just like any other product that you refine down to a certain size. Our iron oxide particles we use are 4/10 of a micron or smaller
Wow.
in size,
Yeah.
and they're what's called a secular. They are six. They have to be 6 times as long as they are wide in order to perform properly.
Really?
If you're
Wow.
not particular and if you don't have that ratio, you won't have good. It may look fine, may be beautiful looking tape, but the magnetic performance will not be right. And then you have to also think about the purity and the type of the ore that you're using to begin with. So that was the original product. During the late 60s and early 70s, people began wanting more output than they could get with iron oxide tape. And so at that time, BASF had mines in Germany and other places where they were mining, pulling up chromium. And they built chromium dioxide tape or made chromium dioxide tape. They accomplished two things. They had very bright, sharp, high end, and they had tremendous signal to noise. The headroom was much greater because
Mm,
given the inherent background noise of a blank tape running across the head, and there'll always be some, and then the output that you could achieve with that tape was much higher, so you had better signal to noise or headroom. And that was not a problem for many, many years. Um, And then it became a problem, because one of the problems in manufacturing chrome tape is, um, besides the fact that it can be a little shallow sounding in bass and in the mid range, um, getting rid of the byproducts of manufacturing chromium dioxide tape is almost impossible. And now with the EPA and its equivalent in other countries, uh, watching what is done in manufacturing plants, you simply could
Whose
not
phone
make.
is this? Is it
Oh, that's
mine?
probably one of ours ringing
Oh,
here.
okay. I was like, okay.
That's
Go ahead.
we have 8 lines coming in, and my phone doesn't have to be answered, but I'm going to hear it ringing. So the bottom line is that the chromium dioxide byproducts would be impossible to use legally now, and uh, there are uses for chrome still in the world, but tape is not one of them. And so we had to give that up. It's still used, by the way, on some of the equipment that we use. We have chrome rollers that we use in our manufacturing, and we have to send those off to a plant in the Carolinas. They're still licensed to do chrome plating and refinishing and that type of thing,
Wow,
but
that's interesting.
Wow.
and
Huh.
very few places can do it. So then, the chrome was a type 2 tape. That was all that meant. It was just a higher output tape to give you better signal to noise. When we began to realize that we had problems in the future continuing to make chrome tape, cobalt became the tape of preference. And cobalt is manufactured in very much the same way that we do the iron tape, and that used to be done with the chrome tape. It is an ore that is dug up out of the earth. It has to be refined the same way. It gives you the type of output that you had with the chrome tape. You have the signal to noise boost still that you had with the chrome tape. You will have almost as bright a high end as you had with the chrome, a little bit less. The advantage is it's much more mellow in the mid range with a lot more warmth and much better bass
Hmm.
than the chrome tape had. So that's a type 2 tape. And if I can give you a little commercial, nobody's made a type 2 tape anywhere in the world in the last 20 years at least. And National Audio this year has brought back type 2 tape. We now have a Cobalt tape, and
Oh, wow.
it's very, very, very close to the tapes made earlier back in the 70s and 80s. The exact suppliers of the cobalt ore and oxides that were used then are gone. The companies are gone. The mining companies that dug it up are gone. And so we've had to find, there's only one place we've been able to find that can even actually refine the cobalt ore correctly. But it's very close to what was made in the 1970s and 80s. And if you set your deck the same way and you have the technical expertise to maybe fine tune just a little bit, you can get the same performance or maybe even a little more output than we did in the 1970s and 80s. So that was type 2 tape. And then I can't really speak to a type 3. I keep hearing there was a
Yeah.
type 3 briefly, but it was kind of a short flight. It was an airplane without wings, and it
Yep.
didn't take off. Type 4 was metal particle tape. And I saw it made at Ampex back in the day. They were making a certain kind of videotape with it, and they experimented making cassette tape with it. I think also Sony made some, and maybe some of the other manufacturers. Same thing, more output even than the chrome, better signal to noise. Um, the tremendous disadvantage is that it was very, very, very abrasive. And after just a few plays, your tape would start basically grinding grooves into the playback and record head.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
And it's watch out, guys. Anybody out there who is buying old Type 4 tape, you may like the performance of it, but it will be quickly degrading the quality of your decks, and
Wow.
it just grinds
Yeah.
your head. And that's why
Even the high quality decks, like the Tascam or the
doesn't
Nakamichi, or
matter. Doesn't matter. No,
wow.
it'll grind the ferrite head. It'll grind into a glass head. It is very abrasive. So
Wow.
that's the dirty little secret about Type 4 tape. So
Yeah.
that's Type 1 is still the standard. Probably all the tape made in the world everywhere except National Audio is all Type 1, and there are different grades of Type 1 oxide. We make a Type 2. We will never make a chrome or a ferric or a metal tape, because there are environmental reasons you can't make it. And then secondly, it's just the metal tape is really a bad idea. It sounds good
No.
when your heads are new and the tape is, but it quickly degrades.
Wow. I got
Now,
one more quick question, and then I'll let you go. I'll let Seymour take it. So the
Sure.
new Chrome that you were talking about, that you or like the Chrome that was
It's
done in the
Cobalt, yeah.
70s, this is something compared to the 799 that you had, the Master,
The original 799 was BASF Chrome tape.
right?
When there was still a supply of that, we bought the last of that they had, and actually it was what they called their Super Chrome. That was the last of their tape.
I have
And
some.
when that ran out, that was it. And people kept asking for it, and they were asking for $7.99, and it had been off the market for years. When we
Yeah.
brought the Cobalt tape back on the market, we realized that there were some demand for the consumer market for pre-loaded blanks, and we
Right.
thought, well, it would be kind of neat to bring $7.99 back, but to have it be the current Cobalt tape that would still
Okay.
be, people who use Chrome could use the Cobalt. And so that's what the current $7.99 is. We brought that back. We also manufacture under different brand names for people all over the world. So if you are buying a current Cobalt tape, you're buying one of our formulations, no matter whose name is on it.
Wow. That's very cool.
very
Seymour?
cool. Yeah. When you manufacture cassette or quarter-inch reel-to-reel, do you have to slice it to
Yeah.
get it to the side? You do.
Yes,
That's
we
what I
do.
thought.
We manufacture tape on a 6.5-inch wide base film.
Wow,
It's
that's great.
a roll of film 10,000 feet long and 6.5 inches wide. And
Jeez. Yeah.
we get 40 1/8 inch cassette tape with reels out of that. We take it to a slitter. We have 2 Duesenberry slitters here, and they're quite elaborate devices.
I bet. Yeah, that's cool.
We've had to restore those 2 over the years, but very elaborate devices. And those slitters use tungsten carbide steel blades in
Wow.
the blade nests, and they slit all 40 reels at one time. We slit off the extra 1/8 of an inch, or excuse me, about 1/4 of an inch of either side, because your coating is never good all the way to the very edge. So you slit that off and throw it away, and then you're left with 40 reels of tape out of a 6.5-inch wide jumbo. So that's another operation. We have 2 of those running. It takes 2 of those to keep up with the coating lines. The coating lines put the slurry, or you might call it a paint. It's kind of the
Right.
thickness of maybe hot chocolate, or maybe tomato soup. That's about the
Right.
thickness.
Right.
And
Wow.
that's the magnetic oxide. We put that on with slot dies. We orient all the oxide particles in the same direction so it'll perform properly. We have to coat it under just the right conditions of heat and humidity, and then we calendar that tape after it comes off the coating line. The coating line, the tape actually is coated, enters 48 feet of ovens that we heat with just hot air. No gas or anything is burned in that process. And 8.4 seconds after that tape enters that oven, rolling from end to end, the full 10,000 feet. When a
Wow.
given point on the tape enters the oven, 8.4 seconds later, it comes out dry. And then it
Wow.
goes to calendars
Mm.
to press it and compress it and polish it, and then to the slitters. So that would be the short answer to that question, Seymour.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's pretty
That's
amazing. I
pretty
mean,
cool.
you just don't think of it otherwise. You just think, oh, I got a cassette here.
Yeah.
But when you manufacture, do you have a problem with how thick the coating has to be?
Yes,
How you deal with all that too, right? The coating
we
of
do
the
that.
oxide, and
Uh-huh.
it's like you said, like a paste almost when you put it on there, or
It
a slurry.
is. It's a
Yeah, that's
slurry,
cool.
and then
That's
we
great,
have a
man.
device. We have a device that actually set the gap on the slot die that's applying the slurry to the base film, and it's applying it as the base film runs by at 200 feet a minute, and it's basically like squirting it on there and then squeegeeing it, like you'd
Oh,
squeeze
okay.
paint or something.
Right.
That's kind
Yeah.
of a process. And then we not only have set the gap on the slot die to the right thickness, and normally you're coating at about, depending on the tape, about 3.5 to 5 microns is your thickness of the coating. At the other end of that line, 48 feet away, we have a little atomic device that shoots a little beam down on the tape as it's coming out, and then there's a reader underneath it, and that measures the thickness. And if we
Yeah.
are
Okay.
above or below the thickness that we've set, an alarm goes off and we stop the coating line. And I'm happy to say that doesn't happen. This only maybe happened once or twice
Right,
over
yeah.
years, but we do watch that. So yeah, it's very critical. And what you don't want is a variance of the thickness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily make sense that 5 microns is necessarily going to record better than 3.5 microns. It depends on the oxide and the thickness of the base film and a lot of other things. But the consistency of the thickness is very important. You don't want thick spots and thin spots.
Right.
So
Because your volume would go up and down too, wouldn't it?
it certainly would. It certainly will.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
Seymour, it's pretty much probably almost like making the pickups. You know, it's the consistency of the wires that you
number
winding
of
around the
turns, you know, the
coils.
coils and
You know,
everything.
and the thickness
Yeah.
and the how even you do it and all that. It's probably kind of like the same
Yeah.
concept.
Luckily, when I was growing up, um, I had a chance to meet Les Paul, you know, and I would go backstage with him, and he would show me his the pulverizer that would run a machine developed by Ampex, you know, and he had multi tracks on it where he could play a different track and everything. And he said the speed was important to keep
Yes.
I guess, you know, the quality, you know, when he was recording, because he would have to rewind the tape and play it back and record another track, which is so cool, you know. So I saw that how he was doing it, you know. But the tape machine was so important. He was always back there tweaking it, making sure
That's
the
right.
azimuth was all set right and everything, you know. So you record on one head, you want to make sure it's playing back at the
Right.
same area on the second head, you know, the playback
right.
head.
Right.
And it was
Right.
really neat seeing what he was doing there too, you know. And he showed me all that, and I was pretty lucky. But he talked about Ampex, how it was important that helped develop the big machine with multi heads on it too, which was so cool, you know.
Well, I can
Yeah.
see more. There's going along with that, and I'm not trying to preempt your
No,
discussion
no,
of that.
no,
It
no.
plays into what you're saying here. The way we actually record tapes for the record labels now, you might imagine thousands of cassette decks lined up in racks and recording cassettes. That's not how we do it. You remember the old Ampex reel-to-reel tape recorder? The
Yep.
original one, when it hit the market, that was very famous, was the old Ampex 350 or 351. It's a gigantic machine, about the size of a washing machine. It would run
Yeah.
14-inch reels, and it did excellent quality. And as time went on, it morphed into other things, kind of like the coronavirus. It kept mutating, and so
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
it later became a 440 or whatever model it was, and Ampex refined it and refined it and refined it. And years later, they finally quit building those machines. But some of the people who had built them in the past and remember the technology did start another company. And that company was able to adapt that idea and those procedures to 1/8 inch tape. And instead of running at 7.5 or 15 IPS or 30 inches per second, the decks we have now were built in the 1970s. They look the same, but they run at 150 inches per second.
Good
Wow.
You've
Lord.
got all 4
Jeez.
tracks at one time. There are
Wow.
20 of these recorders tied to each master bin. The master bin just plays the master over and over and over and over and over at high speed, and that is fed out onto the recording decks. There are 20 of those tied to each one, and so you may be putting, depending on the length of the program, you may be putting from 25 to 50 to 75 copies of that program on each of those reels. But the
Wow.
same technology is applied that was applied with those original decks you're talking about that Les Paul was showing you, and
Yeah.
it's the way to record tape. The wow and flutter is virtually non-existent. Frequency
Yeah.
response is great from about 60 cycles on the low end, probably 40 cycles to 60 cycles, and flat to 20K on the high end. You know,
Wow.
those machines will exceed what any
Wow.
cassette deck can play back, and certainly what I
Oh
can hear.
man, that's
Right.
great.
Yeah, yeah. And for us as musicians, especially guitar players, and I know in myself, Seymour, I'm sure you've experienced that for years and years, but I always had problem hearing my guitar recorded in a digital way. And then the first
Yeah.
time I recorded my guitar on on a tape, on a reel to reel, I
Mhm.
was like, wait a minute, it sounds like I'm playing. This is sounds exactly what I heard on my amplifier speaker.
That's
And
right.
Yeah.
every time I went back to the digital recording, I just it didn't feel right to me. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to maybe hate me saying it or not, but I mean, it's true. Seymour, don't you think that it's
Well,
true?
but I'm an analog kind of guy too, and I just I've the recordings that I've done, it's and what I like too is sometimes, I mean, you guys got like Pink Floyd and all these bands, they'll record
Uh-huh.
sometimes digital because they have to, and then they'll upload it to a tape, so you
Yeah,
get that
or
warmth
or
from it and
yeah, or
everything.
sometimes they do it the other way around. Like David Gilmour, he record his guitar on tape,
Okay,
Right.
and
that's
then
what
he
it is.
mix
Yeah,
it on
yeah,
the computer
yeah.
afterward. But that's why, like if you hear David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, or even Mark Knopfler, the reason their guitar sounds so big and
Mhm.
so thick and so natural, it's because they're passing their recording through the tape, and they're not doing it in a digital way.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. But Steve, what do you think happened that this came back? I mean, I think I know the theory, but what do you think that made this all of a sudden coming back so big?
Well, let me say this to you. The big surprise is the demographic group driving the return to the audio cassette or to the vinyl record. And that's the under 35 age group. These
That's what
aren't
I heard.
people like me who are old and remember the audio cassette or the vinyl record as our favorite way to play music. This is the under 35 age group driving this. And as I have mentioned before, maybe to you, Sage, this is a group of people who grew up listening to music on
MP3.
MP3s with
Yeah.
little earbuds on
Yep.
MP3s, cheap
Yep.
little speakers that weren't very good. An
Right.
MP3 is a horrible way to play music. And
Yeah.
that's how they learned music sounds.
Yeah.
And then maybe one day they were over at Grandpa's house and they heard a vinyl record, or they were playing with their dad's old tapes and they heard that. May have not been their kind of music, but it had to strike them at some point. Hey, wait, this sounds a whole lot different than an
Yep.
MP3 earbuds.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was an actual recording of an actual performance. It wasn't
Totally.
a digital representation of a recording of an actual performance. And Neil Young could tell you a whole lot more about this than I did. He recorded his new album, The Barn, if you remember, on analog tape from
Yeah.
the beginning.
Yeah.
And that has been released that way on analog tape and on vinyl. So basically, as I like to say, your ears are analog. The world around you is analog. That's
Yep.
what sounds natural. And
Yep.
Seymour, you mentioned when you listen to yourself playing the guitar and on a digital recording, you could hear it. And I think Sage,
Oh,
you mentioned
definitely.
that also.
Yeah.
The first I listened to CDs, I thought, boy, they're sharp and crisp and
Yep.
clear, and I hear kind of a sawtoothed edge to all the music notes. Now, I'm not a
Yeah.
musician, I'm not a performer, but I've been around music all my life, and I could hear kind of a jagged, sawtoothed edge to the notes. And maybe one of you can explain what that is. I don't
I
know
will
what.
tell you. I have the answer for you. Go ahead.
Well, that's it. You've got a generation of people who are raised on a really bad way to play music. That's not even fair to digital, the way it was being played back. They were listening to that. Then when they finally heard vinyl or tape, they heard a real recording of a real performance. So I think that's the secret. There's all the theories about it's nostalgia. It's something you can hold in your hand. It's something you can read the record jacket or the cassette J
Yeah.
card while you're
Right.
listening. All those things play into it. It's something tangible. It's not downloaded. But I think it is more than that. I think it is actually a more comfortable, natural sound to people. So I'm going to throw it back to you. You had an
Yeah.
explanation. say.
I've talked to a couple of producers and studio engineers that actually worked on um, famous albums back in the 70s and all that.
Yes.
One of the albums, actually, I think I have it over here. It's Supertramp, Crime of the Century, which was recorded completely analog. It was
Yes, sir.
recorded analog, it was mastered analog, and
Mhm.
it was released, of course, analog way.
Sure.
And he was actually one of the engineers who worked on that album.
Okay.
So, and then he told me when digital started to kind of like emerge, like really early 80s,
Okay.
what they did in the studio was, because if you remember, the first CD, or the first digital format came, was AAD, which is analog recording, analog mastering
Okay.
on a compact disc.
All right.
Remember that?
Yes.
So those were sounded still kind of warm, because they still have the analog original recording.
Yeah.
They still have the analog mastering, and all they did is just dump it on a disc.
Uh-huh.
But then they decide, well, let's do something. So what they did was increase the high frequencies
Mm-hmm.
of the actual recording.
Okay.
They boosted up.
All right.
And what happened, we thought, oh my God, I mean, digital sound great because it sounds clear and it
Yes,
sounds very, very sharp.
it does.
But he said when we actually really listen to it, and then later on when you can analyze it on the computer, that all that high frequency boosting, it was a distortion,
Mhm.
and you can really see the spikes and everything, and it wasn't natural.
Yes.
So then what happened to us, and then it became to ADD, analog recording,
Mhm.
digital mastering, and then it goes on a disc.
Mhm.
And then after that, it was DDD, which is digital recording, digital mastering on a disc.
Yes.
I think what happened to us, for 30 years, our brain and ears kind of like got used to that sharp kind of a thing,
Okay. All right.
that you
I,
thought, well, that's how it's supposed to sound,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's not.
That's the flip side of that coin I was talking about. And then think about this, guys. In digital recording, the higher the sampling rate you're able to achieve, the better it sounds. And as I understand it, at each millisecond, there is only one dominant frequency in
Yep.
digital recording. There aren't really
Mm.
any harmonics. It's
Yep.
one dominant frequency at each millisecond.
Yep.
The tighter you can pack those little frames together, the higher the sampling rate you can make, the more it begins to trick your ears into thinking they're hearing an analog recording. That's
Right.
why the higher sampling rates sound better. So it's sort of the flip side of that coin you're talking about.
Right. And when you listen to digital music, I mean, it's all about numbers and pulses, you
Mhm.
know. So it's it's the laser that it's kind of like reading numbers. It's not reading a true, as you called it, we live in an analog world.
That's right.
This is natural. I mean, our ears are natural occurrence.
Yes,
The trees that the leaves that are moving by the
that's right.
wind, that's a natural occurrence.
That's right.
A sound waves, that's natural. Digital
Mhm.
is not natural. It's all numbers and pulses. It's just, I don't know.
I agree. I'd be interested in getting Seymour's opinion on this. Seymour, I talked about hearing a rough edge to the musical notes. You're a musician, and you're also into the building of the instruments. Do you hear that, or what are we talking about there?
well, it's the higher frequency, like the recording industry puts into it, I think, because a lot of us older guys, we've lost so much of our high end over the
That's the
years,
first thing to
for
lose.
one
That's
thing.
right.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to maybe boost it so we can hear it.
Mhm.
But these kids grow up on little earbuds, And I remember growing up, man, I had like a 15, a 12, a little 8-inch and tweeter and everything. And man,
Uh-huh.
you would blast, Jeff Beck, man, through that. And all of a sudden, I mean, it opens up and the whole building's vibrating, and nowadays you just got this little thing in your pocket or it's Wi-Fi and you got the signal transformed through the Wi-Fi, so it gets to your little earbuds, and then you're
Sure.
listening to that on a little 1/8 inch speaker,
Yes.
coming out of
Yeah.
your ear.
Uh-huh.
So I think so much of the music has been transformed, and I really hate when I buy a new album or something that it's been remastered.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you guys have probably seen it too. Like it's been
Yeah.
remastered by this person or that person,
Right.
and it's
Yes.
supposed to sound better, but it doesn't sound like what I remember growing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And I hate that part. And but the music is so different too. What we're listening to today, it depends, on the bands, if they're real bass or they're doing all the hammer on stuff. I mean, there's so much happening,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to somehow keep it cleaned up. So the
Yes.
only way to clean it up is to add brightness to it and get rid of the bottom end, so it's not distorting your earbuds. And
That's I hadn't thought
so
of that.
yeah, there's so much in the music, and depends who the producer is, what generation they grow up in. And I mean, I grew up with Chet Atkins and listening to him play,
Yes.
and
Uh-huh.
Dwayne
Right.
Eddy and the way he
Yeah.
played, and
Right.
to me the recordings sound great, and
Yeah.
all the stuff James Burton did with Ricky Nelson,
Yep.
all the great solos he did, and he was just using a small amp, and then the Ventures. I mean, I listened to the Ventures, and that's how I listen to the guitar. When
Yes.
I hear them, that's the sound that I love.
Yes.
And nowadays there's so many bands with all the overdrives, and they got all the
Mm-hmm.
preamps, and it's all going into a speaker, and then that has to be transformed from a microphone to the recording head, and it's like there's so many things, and then it's all EQ'd.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like recording from the back of the amp because it's more of a natural sound. The front of the amp, it's like processed so, I mean, it's the brightest sound you can get in the front of your
Mm-hmm.
amp when you record it. But
Yeah.
in the back, it's more natural. That's why, like Roy Buchanan, he would record, he put the mic in the back of his amp, and it was
Mm-hmm.
more of a natural sound for him. What he
Right.
he sounded like recorded versus what he heard out front. He would always turn his amp around so he wouldn't have to hear the front of the speaker,
Okay.
when he
Yeah.
would record it. And but when you record that on a tape, it's to me the best way to do it. Everybody now's got their little, you know, I hate to say it, their little Sony recorders, and they're
Mm.
recording a band for a live concert album,
Yes.
type of thing.
Right.
And
Right.
it's all digitized.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound anything like what you hear as a
Mhm.
natural guitar sound for me.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So,
I can tell you, Steve, and I mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. I never had a chance to um, record, on reel to reel or because it wasn't available for me. I was born in '69, so when I start playing, we were already like late '70s, and then digital started.
Right.
But when I had my first, fact, I think it's behind me. It's the TIAC 3440,
I see that.
which it's the great Seymour Duncan uh, got it. And so when I recorded my guitar the first time on it, and it was the first time I
Mm-hmm.
experienced recording analog,
Yes.
I realized why I never liked recording before, because my guitar never sounded correct. I mean, it just never sounded me. It wasn't me,
Mhm.
you know.
Okay.
And then I realized the importance of capturing th- the sound, like Simon was talking about, when you're playing through an amplifier and then you got a speaker in front of you.
Yes.
You hear yourself. This is how you hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And on tape, it's exactly what you hear if you play either on stage or in the room.
That's right.
When you play digital, it's not. It just never sound the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started to get, I mean, I always had cassettes, but I never, as a kid, you're like, oh yeah, that's the format you listen to music, but I never really got into why does it sound so warm. And I think there's something about the warmth and as you call it, that's natural, that
Yeah.
it's does some internal vibration in your body that what I call it happiness. It
Hmm.
there's something there.
Yes, there is.
Don't don't you think, Seymour or
Oh
Steve?
gosh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I was thinking, sometimes I'm walking around and I got my music playing off of this thing, and look, you got your two little speakers at the bottom here, and you
Okay.
just don't hear it. You don't hear the warmth, you don't hear the depth,
Yeah.
you don't hear the frequencies that make you, like Sage said, feel good,
Yes.
and
Right.
and it's so important that these young kids get educated to hear what cassettes and the recording tapes are all about, man. I mean, it'll make a night and day difference to you, and listen to it, and go out and get your mom and dad's old speakers out of the garage, and hook them up and listen to an old, even your little hand recorders. That I think I
Right.
got you one, Sage.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you can,
Sony. There was like a Sony.
yeah, and it
The
plays
little
cassettes.
Walkmans
Yeah.
and things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And they were
Yeah.
great. They were great,
Yeah.
and I love all that. The only thing now is just convenience. Sometimes with analog versus digital. Digital, it's easy for kids to throw their iPod or whatever in their pocket, and
That's right.
take off. But I still have my Walkmans and everything
Yeah.
that play,
Yes.
which is
Right.
great. And I found two for you, Sage. So I got to
Wow.
get them out there. Yeah,
Hello.
the old Sony
Yeah.
Walkmans.
Hello. I know.
Which are great.
Steve, I would like to say something, and it's actually I wanted to say it to the people out there. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of them listening to us and say, like, oh, what you guys are talking about? Cassettes sounded crap.
Yeah,
They're like, we remember had to go and put a pencil in and just roll it back, and it
that's
just
right.
never sounded right, blah, 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 blah. Well, yes. Uh Having a cassette doesn't mean that you're going to have all the best quality if you're running it into a so-so machine. So if you're
Yeah.
running it in a really bad
That's true.
uh, head or a really bad manufactured machine, of course it's not going to sound right. I mean,
It's can be limited by the head, the amplifier, everything it goes through. And then, Sage, something else I was going to mention, to be quite fair about this whole thing, there were some really bad tapes made in the
yes,
1970s, 80s. The tape industry, possibly like the vinyl industry, ruled the world and got a little complacent. And it got to the point for a while that I don't know if they felt like good was good enough. It didn't have to be really good. We look at some old tapes that were made in the 1970s and 80s, and uh, the audio is okay. The tape itself that some of them used wasn't really great oxide. It wasn't really well recorded.
Yeah.
You see imprinting that was done on the cassettes. It's all blurred and smeary and all that type of thing. They got a little complacent and they got a little bit careless because they already ruled the world. What did they
yeah,
need? And so I think part of what people remember maybe is some of the last years of the complacency of
Yeah.
the audio industry. And the tapes that some of the tapes being made today are far better physically than those tapes were. I know people demand more than they did at that time. Um, we have three different oxides, and we have to have one that we make just for the home user to record on Type 1 tape on his home deck, whether it's an old Sony Walkman or a Pioneer or whatever he's got, because that's 370 to 380 Orsted coercivity. And then we have another one that we duplicate on that is 330 Orsted coercivity, but we can get about 4 to 6 dBs greater output, signal to noise and headroom out of that tape than we can the 380. We can't run it to record it on a home deck and get that kind of performance because you don't have that kind of control about your bias. But on the reel-to-reel decks, like we duplicate the music for the music labels, we can come very close to what you had with reel-to-reel tape. So
wow,
part of it was some bad tape in the past, okay? And
yeah,
there is some of that being made now. It looks good, but the tape can only be as good as the iron oxide you put on there. No matter how well
Mm.
you manufacture it, it can only be as good as the oxide. and what that oxide is capable of. So I think, and then you look back to having to wind your tapes back in with a pencil. Uh, Part of that was that clean the machine. What do you mean? There was
Yeah.
some of that going on back then. When you had a stereo in the car, you couldn't reach back in there and clean it.
Right.
But you
Right.
got
Right.
the heads and the rollers and all that clean. Part of that was that. Part of that was just it was just the complacency on the part of the listener and on the part of the industry, I think. And I think that may be, unfortunately, part of human nature. I don't think we're going to be complacent again if we're going to stay around, and that's our attitude here. Uh, Whatever we do each day, we do the best we can, but we hope that the tape we make next year is better than the tape we're making this year, and we are not going to sacrifice the way we go about it. And I think, Seymour, I can almost speak for you, and I won't. You feel the same about guitars and the instruments that go into that industry. Uh, do you see
Yeah.
that? See that you're overcoming past complacency, not
Oh,
on your
definitely.
but
Yeah.
on other people's part?
Right. Right. And with me too, I have to look back and really examine what was being done, and how it was being done. And so much of that has been lost over the years. And there was a part of time when Fender wasn't even wax potting their pickups, and they would feedback and all this stuff. But I would find. Now here's a question for you, Steve. How many times can you play a cassette versus like an LP? Do you think? Have you ever
Oh,
looked at that?
we haven't tested LPs. Uh, a tape is going to outlast in just lifetime and durability. It's going to outlast an LP, and I like LPs
Yeah,
too.
that's what I
No
thought. Yeah,
problem with them at all. Every time you play an LP, you have the needle physically
scraping.
dragging through the grooves, and it is
Yeah,
going to degrade it a little bit each time you play it. That's why
yeah,
back in the day when all the music was delivered to the radio stations with brand new LPs, every time there's a new release, the first thing the radio station would do would be to play that LP and record it on tape. And they would play
yeah.
Huh.
it
That's right.
they would play it on the air generally off of either a little tape cartridge that looked something like an 8-track. It was better quality, but it was the same
Oh,
kind of,
wow. I didn't
Right.
or
know
real,
that.
Yeah.
real tape. Because you knew every time you played the record, it was going to degrade a little bit just due to the physical needle dragging on the groove. Uh, and you have a tape head rubbing across tape, but it's not nearly as uh, damaging to the media. And I know that the tape we make now, we put all sorts of lubricants and things into the tape to keep it from being abrasive to your head, so that it will pass over the head with less noise and be less abrasive, and so it will perfect the tape and protect it better too. So haven't timed out LPs. I don't know how many plays but like I said, we have run actual cassettes that we've run 40,000 passes plus, and
Incredible.
they're still listenable. You may have to crank the volume up a little bit, but they're very listenable after that time. And I've never seen a tape wear in two from being, played. I've seen them
Played.
break,
Yeah.
stretch, and everything else, but they're not going to
Right.
wear in two just to being played.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Steve, go ahead,
I'm
Seymour.
sorry. Is it like when you put the magnetic paste or whatever you want to call it
Mhm.
onto the tape, are you using like a polyester tape or a
Yes.
vinyl tape or
It's
celluloid
Mylar. It is a Mylar. It's called BOPET
mylar?
film, biaxially oriented polyester, some kind of film.
Oh, that's
The
great. Yeah.
point is, it's only if we're making C60 tape, tape for up to a 60-minute cassette, we're using a film that's only 48/100ths of a mil thick,
Oh, right.
and
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that's very easy to stretch. And so
Yeah,
what
I can see.
we use
Yeah.
a special film that has been pre-stretched both the long way and crossways. And
Really.
that's
Yeah.
very, very important. So the film should be pre-stretched. And I think all the tape made in the world now, except some maybe being made in China, is on the pre-stretched film. And one of the
Wow.
little things we're going to announce pretty quickly, I guess we are today, is that in March or April, we will be bringing back 90-minute tapes. We have
Wow.
not found the base film that we were happy with until
Yeah.
just recently. And we finally convinced the people who've been making our 48 gauge to make us a C90 thickness base film. So we can coat the same thickness of oxide on it, and get 90 minutes worth of tape in a pack. But yeah, it has to be
I got
pre-stretched film. That's part of it.
I got you know, Steve, I don't know how much time we have, and I'm sure you're busy, and I would love to maybe do a second part for to that conversation at one
Let's
point.
do that, and maybe come back and do some shots of the equipment and so on. Maybe
That would
we
be great. You know, I think
maybe we
probably
can get
maybe some
Seymour
of the
here, and
listeners.
I can look at the equipment together. How'd that be, Seymour? You come to St.
Oh,
Louis,
I'd love it. Yeah, definitely.
we'll get
I
you up
mean,
there
that's
by the
to me
table
what
line.
it's all about, you know, the
There you go.
equipment, you know, and seeing,
Right.
you
You
know,
know,
and it's just, and no trade secrets. I mean, it's all proprietary to Steve here,
Yeah.
but
Well,
the
basically,
neat,
the only trade secret we have is the formula we use on our tape, and we don't
yeah,
divulge
that's
that.
fine. Yeah, I
The rest,
mean, nobody needs to know that, you know,
if you
and
do it right, there's only one way to do it right. We see there are
yeah,
thousands of ways to do it wrong. There's only one way to do it right.
right. That's great.
um,
Oh boy.
so maybe one last question before I let you go. Gosh, man, I have like thousands of questions, and I knew it's not going to be enough, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you is the rumors and the present that it's going on in the tape world. One of them, it's not a secret anymore. Tascam is re-releasing for the first time in, I don't know, 40 something years, um, uh, tapes to work with their I have the Porta studio right over there,
Yes.
which I believe you guys are manufacturing it for them.
Well,
Oh, there we go.
it
Hello.
might look something like that. And we've
Oh,
been collaborating with them to do that. This was not, excuse me, I can't get it back in the right.
go to your right a little bit.
Let's try this.
The other way. There we go.
There
That's
we
it.
go. There we go.
There we go.
The thing about the Porta Studio is, and here's the actual cassette. The thing
Oh, there we
about
go. It looks like reels. Oh my lord,
that's right.
love it.
It was designed to only run Type 2 tape. So basically, you were way over biased if you put a Type 1 tape in it, and nobody's made Type 2 tape for about 20 years. So
Right,
we are working with Tascam, and we're very happy. I can say that because they put out advertising now saying that we're
right.
collaborating on it, and
Yes.
we've done some special formulating that really fine tunes that tape for the Porta Studios. And their goal was to make a cassette that looked exactly like what they did back in the 1980s when they first were doing that. So we're very happy to be doing that. And we have two formulations of Cobalt. We have one for them and one for everybody else. And the reason that we don't just do one, we've actually formulated a tape that just performs particularly well when it's fine tuned for the Porta Studio operation.
Okay. So so the one that Tascam is going to release, you guys are actually manufacturing, right?
Yes, yes, and I
Okay.
think
This
that's
is
perfectly okay to say that. They've announced that.
well, they advertise it. I mean, they even said that you guys are doing it. So I mean, that's why I brought it up. And I wasn't afraid of saying
We're
it.
very proud to be
Um,
working with them.
this is this is guys, if you're listening, this is how a huge comeback. If Tascam is putting tapes back in the business,
Hmm.
it's big, because I mean, all they did was digital for the last, I don't know, what,
That's right.
25 years.
That's right.
So if they are putting their effort and money getting tapes out, and you know what's going to come next, there's going to have to be machines
I know what I hope comes
that
next.
will have to play those tapes. So
Yes,
we know what's coming,
right. Well, we hope that.
right?
We hope that'll be. I can't speak for them, but we
I
wish
know.
them well, and we're really trying to help out the best we can.
This is great. And
Yeah, they're a great company. So
They are.
yeah. And I get one last question before I let Seymour, and then we're gonna have
Sure.
we're gonna let you go.
Okay.
So about a year or a year and a half ago, I tested two of your tapes, the 256 and the 456,
Yes.
I believe. They stayed at the same formulation, or is there any upgrade to what I've tested last time?
Both of the 456 is the same oxide that it was before. Our methods of coating have changed slightly, and we've added some additional non-magnetic components to our slurry that make it coat a lot better, and we can finish it a lot better than we did then. But
Okay.
256, we changed oxide. We were bringing in an oxide from overseas for that, and it's still being used by most of our competitors. The only thing it had in common with being a tape you should use on home decks was it was the right coercivity. But we didn't like the refining process they were using on it, the consistency of the oxide particles, and so on. So we have a new one now that is it's a different oxide, a different actual oxide particle that we're using on the 256. Still make both. The 256 is for the home user for the 380 Orsted deck. The 456 is for the reel-to-reel user. And by the way, we make that available to our competitors in the business as well, worldwide. So, we want to promote the format. So there are people duplicating on our C456 all over this country and the rest of the world.
So which will work better for my Nakamichi Dragon, the 456 or the 256?
You can't buy us. I don't think you can buy us the Nakamichi for 330 Orsted tape. If you could, it would perform better.
Okay.
Or
They
more
have
hit.
they have a manual biasing.
If you can fine tune it, then that's
Yeah.
the tape you want to use. But I would say try it first before I'd
Right.
represent that as a home user
Okay.
tape.
Seymour, last
Yeah.
question goes to you.
Well, one thing for Steve is the people listening out there, let them know that this stuff is available through your company. You can buy blank tapes, cassettes, and boxes, whatever you need for manufacturing your own cassettes at home.
Right.
Pre-recording and doing your own recordings and stuff, which I
That's
think
a
is
big part of the appeal.
fantastic to offer that. Yeah.
Big part of the
Yeah.
appeal. We work
Yeah.
with that all the time. So I appreciate so much what you are doing, Seymour, and I hope to meet you in person and escort you through our
Yeah, we
plant.
will.
Maybe do a
Yeah.
second session of this. And Sage, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And we said Tascam, this is how big it is. For the listeners out there, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve.
Yes.
Metallica and John Mayer, new album that came out last year, were on cassettes.
Yes.
Correct?
Oh yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Most of the major record labels are issuing both vinyl and cassettes now. And there have been a couple of instances where it was only available in analog. So those are the ones we really, really like. But yes, I think that's true.
This is amazing.
Fantastic.
It's also funny when you're watching movies or TV shows lately. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but there's a lot of either vinyl or tapes in in the scene. You all of a sudden see like a tape or a vinyl, where before it was just CD.
Well, and on the other hand, how do you show a download?
Yeah, you're right.
What's a download look like on a TV show?
But you can
Yeah.
literally show this.
can.
I mean, the enjoyment, guys. I'm telling you, this is like
Well,
shiver behind my spine.
The whole format of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies have been
Yes.
the kid's mom gives him the old mixtape, and
Exactly. Yeah.
that's kind of the fun of it. So
Well, Steve, it was pleasure.
pleasure to
I'm
be on.
seeing probably a part 2 to this, because I know I have tons of questions. I'm sure Seymour probably has tons
good
for you too.
All right.
Maybe we can work on something that in the near future we can combine a conversation with maybe a tour of
Let's do that.
some of the areas of your factory that we can see live.
And let's try to get Seymour down here. If he comes to St. Louis, he's 3 hours away on I-44. And I didn't mention on your recording today, but we have 35 employees at National Audio. We're not a huge company, but of those, probably 15 or more are musicians, and so they're
Seymour,
very.
I'm telling you, you got to do it.
Yep.
If you
know,
There we go.
I'm sure there's a lot of fans over there on second, third, and fourth floor over there. So we got to do it, Seymour.
Oh, that's cool. That's fantastic.
I've been trying to convince Seymour to come over here. Well, he loves doing arrowheads, so this is the area
That's right.
to find some stuff.
Okay.
but there's a lot of historical stuff in this area,
That's right.
So
See,
Steve,
you're
maybe you
welcome.
will
You're
help
welcome
me
to,
to
if you
bin
want to do
his.
a remote show or something, you're welcome too. We can just all three tour the plant. And you can just kind of
Would love
Yeah,
to
that'd be
do that.
fantastic.
whatever you like. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that'd be great. Man. Boy.
don't go anywhere, Steve. I'm gonna end the stream, and
All right.
then I'll just okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank
I
you.
Thank you,
really
buddy.
enjoyed that. Seymour, I'm
Appreciate
sure
it.
you did too.
Thank you,
Yep.
Seymour.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Guys out there, thank you for watching us. There's gonna be part 2, I'm sure. So,
Let's do it.
but it will be available on YouTube, so you can watch it and all that stuff. So,
All right.
thank you very
Great.
much, and I'll see you guys soon. Don't go away. Hold
Okay.
on. And I